morning. Thank you for joining us at Second Baptist Church. My name is Christy and I'll be teaching the Bible lesson again out of Bible Studies for Life. We are in a 6-week session right now, and today we're on session 4 of dealing with messy relationships, and this week it's on serve. So we're going to be looking at Galatians chapter 5 and chapter 6, and look at Paul's letter to the Galatian church. And there are a few places in there where he mentions how they should serve one another, and those are the passages that the author wants us to look at today. So that's what we'll be looking at. Think about a time when you've had good service. We can all think of times when we've had bad service, but think about a time when you've had something good happen in a line of service. The author poses a story here that I want to hit a few highlights on, of a passenger who booked a last-minute flight to see his grandson who was really sick. And it says in the book that traffic and long lines at the airport caused him to arrive at the gate 12 minutes after the plane's scheduled departure. But the airline had been informed that this man's tragic situation. And when he got to the airport, the pilot was standing at the gate waiting on him. And the pilot told him, "They can't go anywhere without me, and I wasn't going anywhere without you. Now relax, and we'll get you there. And again, I'm so sorry." Good customer service is not about making the sale or even about keeping the customer. It's just about doing what's right, not expecting anything in return. And in relationships, friendships, even family ties and things like that, service should not be about what we can get out of a situation, but what we can give to the situation. And serving is a tangible way that we can love other people. And we've talked in this session on dealing with messy relationships, we've talked about love. And service and love really go hand in hand. And we're going to kind of put that together today, because you can't have love without service. And you can serve people without loving them. But if you love them, you do want to serve them. So we're going to look at this today. Like I said, we're in Galatians chapter 5. We're going to start in verse 13, and we're going to look at freedom to serve first. So in Galatians chapter 5, verse 13, it says, "For you were called to be free, brothers and sisters. Only don't use this freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but serve one another through love. For the whole law is fulfilled in one statement: love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out, or you will be consumed by one another." Verse 13 talks about freedom and the freedom to serve. Paul addressed the Galatian church in the first several chapters, and I really challenge you to go read Galatians. It's a short book, because pulling these few verses out, as they're trying to do in this lesson, is a little difficult. Because Paul is really hammering the Galatian church. He's kind of getting on to them because of their attitudes. So, like I said, when you get the whole picture, it is a little hard to pull all this out of it, because he was really condemning them for what they were doing and how they were not being very kind to others. Okay, so he's telling them here in verse 13 that they're free. They're free from slavery. They're free from the law and from legalism. And like I said, if you read Galatians, you're going to see that, because he was telling them that they're not in bondage to their self anymore. The trying to prove something, the striving to do what's right and check all the boxes and pass the test. They're free from all that bondage. And because of the freedom they have, they should use that freedom to serve one another, not to continue to go back to where they are. It's not a license to do what you want. The freedom is not a license to do what you want, but it's an opportunity to do something for somebody else. In verse 14, he talks about fulfilling the law. And like I said, he's already addressed them in the first few chapters and kind of scolded them a little bit because they wanted to keep all these points of the law, and they wanted to act a certain way around the Jews and a certain way around the Gentiles. And they were forgetting that you have one life. You can't live it this way at church or around your Christian friends, and you can't live it this way at work or around your other friends. You have to mesh the two, because that is what life is. It's one big picture. It's not a bunch of different things put together. And so in verse 14, he says, if you really want to fulfill the law, you're going to love everybody. If you want to obey the rules, you'll love other people. And then in verse 15, Paul warns them, don't devour one another. Like a dog attacking another dog, a wild animal. Don't devour each other. Like spiritual discord or attacking somebody's character. Because when you do that to someone, you're really revealing yourself. And it weakens us when we devour one another and when we show contention to one another. Moving right along to Galatians chapter 6. We're going to skip some more verses here. So like I said, go back and read it all. But Galatians chapter 6 verses 1 through 5. And it's, like I said, it's hard for me to kind of jump from that one to this one because I really wanted to explain a little more about those verses, but we're about to right here. So Galatians chapter 6 verse 1 says, brothers and sisters, if someone is overtaken in any wrongdoing, you who are spiritual, restore such a person with a gentle spirit, watching out for yourselves so that you won't be tempted. Carry one another's burdens. In this way, you will fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone considers himself to be something, when he is nothing, he deceives himself. Let each person examine his own work, and then he can take pride in himself alone, and not compare himself with someone else. For each person will have to carry his own load. So in Galatians chapter 6, verse 1, Paul shows an affectionate term towards them. He calls them brothers and sisters. And they're not physically brother and sister. It's a kinship. It's like if you're in a club. In school, you might be in the FFA club or the FCA club, or you might be on the football team or the baseball team. And you are affectionate with those people in a different way than you are other people because you're together a lot. And in the same way, even when we're grown-ups, you might be in the Mason thing, I don't know what it is, but the Mason thing, or you might be a firefighter, or some other sort of bond that you share with another group of people that you really don't have that bond with everybody in the whole world. So he's addressing them as brothers and sisters. If you are a believer, that's how you can address other believers. You don't necessarily have to call them a brother or sister, but you connect with them on a different level than you do, say, someone who's not a believer. You still care about those people, but you don't connect with them like you do a believer. And so it's a warm greeting. And he says, if any of you are overtaken in wrongdoing, and that is when you discover someone in the act of their sin, you get caught. He says, when you catch somebody, you need to restore them with a gentle spirit. Not a harsh, judgmental spirit, but a gentle spirit. So Paul gives them a warning here. He tells them, watch out so you won't be tempted too. First thing he's warning them against is in falling into their own temptation, whether that be the sin of the one they just caught doing, the thing they caught them doing, or just their very own temptation. So that's the first thing we need to watch out for, is that we're all going to sin. So we need to be careful that we don't fall into temptation. But the main thing he's pointing out to them is, don't congratulate yourself for the sinfulness of them and the sinlessness of you. Don't display an arrogant spirit about the fact that, well, they're doing something wrong and I'm not, so I'm okay. And pat yourself on the back. Be careful. Paul's greatest warning in the whole book of the Galatian church is pride and arrogance, because they had some. And I can tell you right now, we all have it. So we need to be super careful that we don't fall into arrogance and pride, because we too do sin, and we will encounter other people who are sinning, and we don't need to get arrogant about the fact that we're not doing what they're doing, so we're okay. Now verse 2, he says we all carry some burdens, and we're called to carry other people's burdens. Now the lesson on love, the very first lesson of dealing with messy relationships, I alluded to this verse. I'm not going to go into that again, but it is very important that we bear other people's burdens. This doesn't mean that we pass our burdens off on somebody else and just they're going to take it for us, but that we share our burdens with them so they can help us bear them, whether that be praying for us or providing for us. When somebody has a financial burden, we all want to help. I mean, to a certain degree, even if we don't have the money to just hand them, we want to relieve some of that stress from them, because that's how God made us. When somebody has a family crisis, we know we can't physically take that pain away, but we want to help them fix it. I mean, if we could take it away, we would. If somebody has a physical illness, the first thing we want to do to our friend is get there as fast as we can. My friend's dad had a massive stroke a long time ago, actually, and I remember that phone call. It wasn't even my family, it was my friend who lived in Valdosta. But within an hour, hour and a half, we were all there. All of us friends were there with her through that time. And that's what we want to do. When somebody's physically hurting, we want to help them. Temptations. If you know your friend has a temptation, wouldn't you want to do everything in your power to remove the temptation from them? And oppression. We all face spiritual oppression. Just feeling the weight of the world on your shoulders. And you want to help the people who feel that way not feel that way. So Paul is telling them here, bear each other's burdens. My burden becomes your burden. Your burden becomes my burden. And we carry it together. You don't have to carry your burdens alone. And then in verse 3 through 5, Paul is warning them here, like I said once again, about pride and arrogance. In verse 3, he says, if you think you are superior, you're deceived. And this attitude of superiority and arrogance prevents us from bearing other people's burdens and seeking help when we do have a burden. If you feel like you're better than someone, why would you want to help them? Because you don't want to get your hands dirty, and you don't want to get dirty because of what they're doing. And that's wrong. And when we have a burden, we're going to want other people to help us carry our burden. And if we blew it, it's hard to get that help. And if you'll look at the forgiveness lesson, which was last week, I believe. Forget, all my days are running together. You'll see we are to forgive. We try to forget some of the things, but it's hard. And if you're not there for your friends, if you're not there for your brothers and sisters in Christ, it's just hard because they remember that. And you need them there for you. In verse 4, he talks about examining your own heart. The Greek word here for examine means to put something to the test. Self-deception and pride go hand in hand. Our flesh seeks out other people who we can compare ourselves to and we can look better than. That's what our flesh wants to do. Find somebody that's less than me and I feel better about myself. We need to take responsibility for ourselves so we can take responsibility for others. If we can't own up to our own self, how can we help somebody else or carry their burden? In verse 5, he talks about carrying his own load, one person carrying his own load. This is not a contrast to verse 2, where it says we need to bear one another's burdens. He's just alluding to the fact here that everybody has their own load, and you do have to carry that load to a certain degree alone. But it just makes it so much easier when you got a friend who comes along beside you and helps you. That backpack can get very heavy. So if you take a turn, somebody else takes a turn, or you just stand beside each other and hold it and walk beside each other sometimes, it makes it a lot easier to carry around. We share in and help others with their burdens, like in verse 2, but we have to take responsibility for our own load as well. When you have a load, you have to push through and you have to carry it, and you just have to do it. And it stinks, and it's hard, and I'm sorry, but you just have to do it. And that's why it's so important to call on somebody else to come along beside you and help you carry that load. Moving to the very last verse here. I'll try to wrap it up pretty quickly. I see I'm at 17 minutes already. My attention span's short. Yours might be too. Opportunity. Galatians chapter 6 verse 10. Let me get there. Already closed it there. Says, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us work for the good of all, especially for those who belong to the household of faith. We're going to be given opportunities to do good. We must be alert to them and do good. The Greek word for good means outward deeds of kindness. The particular good that he's referring to in this verse means outward deeds of kindness. An example of outward deeds of kindness is giving. You know, if you know somebody who needs food, you want to give them food. You know somebody that needs money, you try to provide what they need. If you know somebody that physically needs clothing or a place to live or a couch or a bed, you start looking through your stuff and you start giving it away, because that's what you know deep down that you're called to do, is to do that and to serve other people. But it's not just tangible things. It very well starts with that, but it's also encouraging other people, which we've talked about before. And that's something, like I said, that is incredibly hard for me to do. It's just something you have to do. It's something you make an effort to do. So if the Lord brings somebody to your mind, you call them, you text them, you write them a card, you go by their house, you take them some food, whatever it is, encourage people and be alert to their needs. But it also says here that we should work together. That means the brothers and sisters that he was referring to. We should work together as a group to help the poor and the needy in the community and in the world. And we do that. We do that with giving money to missions, or if we see a need in the community, we'll take up a love offering, or somebody that's house burned down, we'll pull together for things like that And I feel like that our churches do a really good job at that. The greatest example, though, of service is Jesus. And if you go back and read through the Gospels, you're going to see Jesus served. He served people that were untouchable. He served his family. He served his friends, his disciples. And if he can do it, after all the scrutiny he was under, we certainly can. And we especially need to do it to our fellow believers. Sometimes it's easier to help the men on the street and the ladies who we think are unreachable and untouchable than it is to help our own fellow believers. Sometimes that can be the case because we can physically see other needs sometimes. And when we come to church, sometimes we put on our masks and no one knows that we need food and no one knows that we need furniture because we feel like we have to be like everybody else. And that's why it's so important to yoke up with a believing church so that you can share your burdens with them and they can help you carry them. So this week, let's look for opportunities to serve within our church. Think of your class. I know you all have Sunday school classes that you go to. Look around the room in your mind. See if there's someone you need to reach out to. Think about all the people who sit around you on the pews. Think about even other church members of other churches. Someone that you need to serve. And just remember, as Paul said, don't get prideful when you think of those people. Let that give you fuel to help them. And just always remember, too, that you're going to need help one day. You will. Tell somebody and get somebody to help you carry your load. Thank you for listening, and I hope you'll be able to join us for our live service on YouTube at 11 o'clock. And let's go to the Lord in prayer, and we'll be done. Thank you, dear Jesus, for this time. And thank you for this passage that we've been able to look at on how we can serve other people. And thank you for giving us the ultimate example of service. Please give us opportunities this week to serve you. Help us to seize those opportunities. Help us to carry somebody else's load and share our load with someone else so they can help us carry our load. And help us to be able to share in those opportunities so that others will be encouraged through our example and through our needs. In Jesus' name, amen.